Hugo, maybe just to tell the audience a little bit about what is your project, what do you do, how do you actually reach so many people in covering a topic that can be a little bit tricky?
So I've been interested in like news and politics for quite a while, and I just started my studies. I was 18 years old. Started my studies at university in Paris, and I was just seeing that so many people in our generation weren't following traditional media, and also were following other source of media, which sometimes were spreading loads of fake news. And so I was just saying, I spend loads of time on YouTube and on Instagram and on all those social media platforms. And my little sister, who's here, I think somewhere here, has spends that much time on the social network too. And there's not that many media working on specifically YouTube and Instagram to make news accessible to young people. So that's just basically how it started. So we started with like videos explaining news subjects in sort of 5 minutes, one subject explaining it. And then we've been, for the past few years, developing quite a few things. Some recaps of news, some fact-checking formats, some reports on subjects which often have some fake news. Like we did a report a few months ago about the Freemasons in France. And so that's that's like one of the subjects when you go on the streets and ask people what do they think are Freemasons. You get loads of different things, and it was interesting to get a video report about this to what's true, what's less true, and answer all those questions.
Okay, that sounds fascinating. So maybe if I can ask the question this way. One of the big challenges is that nowadays we get a lot of information overload, and especially for the younger generation, the phone, 15 different communication apps are constantly beeping. How do you actually get people interested in news content when there is so much buzz around?
So I think there's two things. First of all, the fact that young people, most of all, that's what we were just saying just before, don't follow traditional media. There's several reasons to this. I think one of them is, first of all, a lack of trust. And so, that's really linked to the question of fake news, because if you don't trust traditional media like Le Monde, then the fact-checking made by Le Monde, well, you'll think this is fake news, so you'll see other media. So there's this lack of trust. There's also this difference in terms of formats, which I think is sort of changing, because when you see, for example, well, France Info is doing an amazing work on working on new formats. Le Monde is doing also loads of very good videos on YouTube. So this is sort of changing, but the fact is that there's kind of a distance between, for example, Le Monde, the written magazine, the written newspaper, and the way we consume content online today on Instagram and everything. And I think one of the most important elements is the fact that sometimes, like when I publish content on YouTube or on Instagram, I try to write it so that everyone can understand it, even though if it's the first time you hear about the subject. So there's this idea of doing, if we're doing a video about, I don't know, the program of a candidate, or what's happening with the Réforme des retraites in France, well, there's this idea of saying, okay, for someone who doesn't know anything about it, probably doesn't even know who's Edouard Philippe, or who's this or this member of the government, or what's the CGT, let's make a video that will make all of this understandable. And I think that's another element that's quite important.
Mm-hmm. Great. And can you maybe give an example? What are sort of the recent things that have been really interesting your audiences? Where do you see the most reactions? What kind of topics really get them to get engaged?
So first of all, I think the topics, people who follow me, and it's mostly young people. When I say young people, it's mainly 18 to 24 years old. There's younger and older, but that's mainly like students, university people. And the subjects, that's a good thing first. International subjects work very well.
Really?
When you see like the JT on France 2, you're sometimes surprised to see that international subjects like an attack in one country, or those subjects won't be always at the beginning of the of the news, and they'll come at the end, 1 or 2 minutes, when you've done 10 minutes on the snow in Paris or other subjects. So whereas I see, when I see the stats on my posts we do on Instagram and on YouTube, that international subjects do, matter to young people, and people who follow me prefer having, a sort of recap about what's happening in between, Iran and USA, rather than a sort of less important subjects happening in Paris or happening in France. So that's something that I think is quite important. Then you get, of course, loads of content which sort of arises due to some stuff happening on social media. And sometimes there's a sort of, one example is what's happening with the Uyghur in China. So I made a video a year ago about the subject, just explaining what's happening in China with this Muslim community in China. Mm-hmm. And this video wasn't doing that many views, but then a few months later, there was a sort of rise of mobilization of young people about the subject, sort of all changing their profile pictures and sort of saying like, we have to do something about what's happening in, for Muslims in China. And suddenly, out of nothing, a sort of mobilization rose, and now all people following me were like, I was receiving hundreds and hundreds of messages of young people saying like, you need to talk about what's happening here. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes the subjects that arise among young people are not like directly linked to what's happening around the world. Sometimes it's just like a sort of mobilization that arises, and then
of sort
exactly,
of emotional engagement.
And then people are trying to get to know what's happening about it.
All right. Well, that's really fascinating, and I have to say it's very heartwarming as somebody who did a lot of foreign reporting back in the day to see that people are interested in those topics. Very briefly, what's next for you?
Quite a few things. So basically what we're doing now is we're doing quite a few things. So today I have a team of journalists working with me. So I've now finished my studies, and we've got 4 journalists working full-time on the channel. And we have different objectives. First objective is to continue delivering daily recaps of news, basically like getting the sort of daily shot of news for young people, because the fact is that, I get so many, every day, like I try to speak to people following us, to get to know what they like and whether they read traditional articles or other formats. And the fact is that they don't want to read longer formats. They don't want to go into articles and everything. So that's the fact of so many young people. So we're trying to develop those formats that sort of give a brief shot of news and is a sort of introduction to those subjects. That's one thing. Then we're building more reports, basically. Yeah. So we were in Brazil a few months ago building shooting reports about what's happening in the Amazonian forest, meeting indigenous tribes to see how they tackle all the environmental issues in the region. So we're trying to develop those formats, and I think also longer formats can be a way to tackle fake news and deliver information if it's well edited and well built. And our most popular formats on YouTube today are formats which last around 15, 20, 25 minutes, and the one in Brazil is like an hour. So longer formats can be something if it's well edited and there's sort of story about it.
Okay. Fantastic. So basically, you've conquered YouTube. Now you're innovating the formats, reaching new people. All the best, Hugo. Thank you so much for sharing that experience.
Thank you.
Great.